Happy Friday, everyone. We have been expecting you, and we're so glad that you are here. We're just giving it a moment or two for folks to get settled into this virtual learning space. And I am your host, Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm so delighted to be holding space for this community of learners. Every single week, every Friday, we're here during this hour, and we always learn with and from each other. And so I never take it for granted those who decide to spend this time with us. And so welcome. If you would go to the chat and let us know where you were joining the conversation from. It's always a treat for us to see all the different geographies that are represented. We have folks from many different states, as well as a global audience as well that joins us from time to time. And that is so thrilling for us. We're glad that the impact and the reach is where it is. I see Wingate, North Carolina is in the house. Welcome. So glad you are here. I also want to give a special acknowledgement to those who are joining us from LinkedIn Live. We do have a community of folks that like to get their podcast content from joining us there. We do believe, though, that the Zoom community experience is optimized. And so if you desire to hop over and join us on Zoom, then we will place that link into the comment section for you to do so. However, if you want to stay put, then we certainly are just glad you're here and engaged in whatever capacity. I want you to know that at NWC, we really do value disability inclusion. So we do have closed caption that has been enabled for those who may benefit. Cameras, if you are part of our Zoom community, they are encouraged, but certainly not required. We do love to see smiling faces, but we also know that many of you join us just in auditory capacity. Perhaps you're multitasking and just listening in. And whatever your situation is, we're glad that you're here. Hello, Washington. I see you. Thank you so much for being here representing DC. I'm seeing Charlotte. I'm seeing, of course, Greenville. We are headquartered in Greenville, South Carolina, but we are 100% remote. Our colleagues are all over because our clients are all over, and that business model serves us well and has been in place since inception of NWC. And so once again, I want to welcome you to the Intentional Conversations VodCast, and I hope that you enjoy the show. Welcome again. Let the conversations begin indeed. So that is my cue to lead us right into today's conversation. So if you're just joining us, again, I want to welcome you. I'm Dr. Nika White, and you have joined the Intentional Conversations podcast that is brought to you by Nika White Consulting. So this gives me a great opportunity to shout out my team, who I really do appreciate. We work tirelessly week after week to bring this virtual production to you. And it's just our way as a courtesy of extending learning opportunities to those who wish to deepen their knowledge and understanding of all things diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. So I'm going to take just a quick moment to provide a couple thoughts that we always like to put into the hearing of our community. And I want to first start by saying happy Diwali. Really excited that we have an opportunity to just acknowledge India's biggest and most important holiday of the year. The festival actually gets its name from days of turning darkness into light. And I am so appreciative that at NWC, we really value bringing the recognition for these national observances to our community so that we all can be aware and become more culturally intelligent and leverage that cultural humility to build and foster relationships and celebrate the differences in our world. And so I want to acknowledge that. Also want to take a moment to let you know that we're still in the month of November, and this is Native American Heritage Month. And so as we often share these observances, while we may bring them to your attention during the month that we're actually acknowledging them, this is also a call for us to be mindful of supporting these communities all throughout the year in as many ways as we possibly can. This is Trans Awareness Week, November 13th through the 19th. And so again, that's another population of people that need our support. And we want to make sure that you're doing all that you can to learn as much as you can so that you can be an ally to the trans community. And so thank you to those who are already serving in really meaningful allyship roles to that population. Now, if you've been with us for quite some time, you know that we really love to put out content that can help people just really spend time deepening their knowledge and understanding of all things DEIB. And we have a video series called Inclusion Uncomplicated. There are more than 150. Actually, now I believe there's probably more than 200 of these short clip episodes that are no more than like 2 minutes in length. But if you're interested in being exposed to this content, then I will encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We release new videos, new content every single week. Many of our clients and others are leveraging this as a tool just to spark conversations within their organizations around topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I want to make sure that you're aware of that as well. Now, January the 26th of this year, I launched my book number 3, Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI. That was in partnership with Forbes Books. And from time to time, I like to just remind this audience of that as a resource and a tool. If you have not yet secured your copy, it's available in Kindle, it's available in audiobook, and of course in hard copies, anywhere where you like to get your books. Amazon, of course, is a great and easy resource for securing the book. But one of my favorite parts of the book is that at the end of each chapter, there are these colorful summaries that you see in front of you that really just presents the most salient information that has been expressed in the chapters of the book, along with the critical reflection moments for us to really dig deeper into our learning. So I hope that you will see this as a great tool, and I would love to be in conversation with you about any thoughts you have about the book. Now, if you have enjoyed Intentional Conversations VodCast and you know of others who would also gain value from being a part of this community, but perhaps they prefer their content in a podcast capacity, I want you to be aware that we do extract the audio from our podcast and we make every one of our Intentional Conversations episodes available in podcast capacity, so on the go. And there are multiple platforms in which you can get that content. And so share out with all of those in your network. Now, next week, we will be observing a time of gratitude, a time of being with friends and family. And so we won't be here next Friday for Intentional Conversations VodCast. Just wanted to put that into your hearing, but we will be back the week following and hope that you will join us at that time, and wishing all of you a great Thanksgiving holiday. Now, before I introduce our guest co-host for today, I want to just take a moment to let you know about what you have to look forward to in future weeks in terms of our guest co-host joining us for the Intentional Conversations VodCast. And so on Friday, December the 1st, kicking off the last month of the year, we have Marie DeVoe. And in that conversation, we're going to be discussing white fragility and trauma in Black spaces, trauma-informed leadership as a critical component of DEI work, common trauma responses, and nonviolent communication. So I hope that you will join us on December 1st as we kick off Intentional Conversations for the month. And then the next Friday on the 8th, we'll be welcoming Priscilla Wallace. And so we're going to be discussing family, faith, and life and work-life balance, how moving from being a mentor to a sponsor can remove barriers for people of color, and why it's important to keep conversations intentional. And so I hope that you will mark your calendars and join us, and tell a friend to join us for December 8th for Intentional Conversations VodCast. And if you know of someone that will provide great value to our community, I want to talk with them. I want to hear their story. We want to feature them on the VodCast and give them a chance to have space with this community of learners. And so let us know who those individuals are. And you can do so simply by emailing my colleague, Amora Carter, at amora@nikawhite.com. And she is in charge of all of our bookings right now. I think we're close to being completely booked for Q1 of 2024, but yet and still we are filling up the remaining spots we have during that quarter, as well as looking to Q2 of 2024. All right, so now it is the opportunity that I have, the pleasure and the privilege that I have to formally introduce our co-host for today's Intentional Conversations. And you all know that I find it very appropriate to read our co-host bios. I think that it is necessary for us to know the experience, the credentials, the accolades in which our guest co-hosts are showing up to the conversation. So today will be no different. I'm super excited for you all to be in community and conversation with Minal, Bopaiah. She is an award-winning author, a keynote speaker, and equity strategist. She founded Brevity and Wit, I love that name, a strategy and design firm that helps organizations achieve the change they want to see in the world. Her first book, Equity: How to Design Organizations Where Everyone Thrives, was awarded the 2022 Terry McAdam Book Award for the book most likely to change the way nonprofit professionals work. She is happiest when sharing her infectious enthusiasm for diversity, equity, and inclusion with audiences all around the world. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now, and I am going to spotlight my guest co-host today. I'm going to add her right now. And I want you all to do me a huge favor. I always ask this every week because I think that our co-hosts are all deserving of our gratitude. But find those emojis, find those reactions, those words of affirmation, go to the chat, to the comment section, and let's let our guest co-host Minal know how much we are appreciative of her being here with us today. Thank you so much. I have been looking forward to this conversation, and I'm going to give you a chance to, of course, greet this audience in your own way. But there is one thing that we often ask for our guest co-host to do, and that is to share with us something about yourself that we would not know from reading your bio, as I just did, or from looking and reading your LinkedIn profile. So let us know what you would like to share, and welcome.
Thank you. Hi. So Dr. White, thank you so much for having me on your show. What a professional operation you have going here. This is really impressive. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much. So interesting fact about me. So, something that, well, some people know this. You may know this if you read my book, but if you haven't, then you wouldn't. So that's a good thing. So I actually live in a multi-generational home. I live with me and my husband live with my parents and my brother. It works well in some ways. It's challenging in others, but particularly when you're trying to stop the effects of intergenerational trauma, it can get a little complicated. But I really like it, and I think it is a more sustainable family dynamic than the nuclear family and what we've been led to believe about boundaries and how families are supposed to be made or designed. For most of human history, people have lived in multi-generational settings. And I think there's something really healing and sustainable about it that I like.
I so love that. And so I'm going to get to some of our prepared questions. But again, for those who are familiar with this platform, we are very fluid here. So I want to lean into that a bit, because I feel like there's so much to unpack that this audience would really gain value from understanding more about. I love this idea of the extended family dwelling together under the same roof. And I know that it oftentimes is a part of the culture of different populations. But what you said about it helps us to really think more broadly about how we are defining family. That is critical. And it's because one of the conversations I've had over the most recent years as organizations have tried to think more intently about inclusion as they're developing their policies within the organizations is, how are we defining family? And I'll give you one key example. When you talk about bereavement leave, right? Oftentimes it's written into policies that, immediate family member, and immediate for a lot of people would be maybe a spouse, maybe a child, right? But when you have these, multi-generational family homes, that family unit, that family definition is a bit broader. And so those are the types of conversations that I have had, but I think is really enlightening for a lot of people that may not even have that perspective. And so I just want to give you a moment to lean into that and share whatever is coming up for you.
Yeah, I talk about this in my book when we try to design for equity, that we have to question some of the assumptions that we make in that, and the assumption of how we define family. The example I give is that, in my late 20s, I tried to get my brother on my health insurance, and I couldn't. In order to get him on my health insurance at the age of 28, we would have to say that he couldn't work, he'd have to file for disability, and if he ever made more than $2,000 a month, he would get knocked off, right? And we don't think about that, but if we really think about this deeply, I could marry a stranger of any gender, put them on my health insurance, they could go on and make $1 million and still be on my health insurance.
Yeah, good point.
And that's because we define family in this country by sexual relationship or financial dependence.
Yeah.
My brother is my first degree blood relative, but that there's no like legal rights to give him the benefit of being my family member.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I love that. Another parallel that I'll draw here that is not exactly the same, but certainly conceptually, I think that is part of this broader conversation is even when we think about parental leave, right? It used to
Mhm.
be all about maternal leave, then it went to parental leave, and then we
Mhm.
had to think about, well, now when we are focusing on parental leave, are we talking about those who have just birthed kids directly, or are we
Mhm.
talking about those who adopt, those who
Yeah.
foster? I mean, so the conversation certainly needs to be broadened beyond what maybe it has traditionally been known as. And so I love the idea of challenging people to interrogate their assumptions. I think that's a really important point that we're kind of launching out this show with today. So thank you. Okay, so congratulations on the success of your book, baby.
Yeah.
I use that language a lot because, sometimes it even takes more than 9 months to birth a book. I
Yeah.
know for me, it was more than 9 months. And it really does feel like you are presenting something to the world that you're so proud of, but yet and still there are all these range of emotions. Will they like it? Will it resonate? Does it say all the things it needs to say? And so I don't know about you, but I certainly went through those range of emotions. But again, I'm going to give the title again, and then we're going to place it actually into the chat because I want you all to get this book and to read it. And there's also a special offering and discount code that Minal is making available. And so we'll share that in the chat as well. But again, the title is Equity: How to Design Organizations Where Everyone Thrives, right? So I want you to share with this audience what inspired you to delve into the topic of designing equitable organizations. And I want you to even take it a step further, because I think that the language of designing
Yeah.
is very intentional. And so I want you to put some greater context around, what does it mean to design equitable organizations versus just value and equity in the organization?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. I mean, I think to date, my book is the only book on equity in the workplace. Like I think there's been a lot of conversations about inclusion, and people assume that equity can just get lumped in really easily, but equity is quite different from inclusion. I
Yeah.
think inclusion is really about how people feel and psychological safety, and it manifests a lot in the interpersonal dynamics in an organization. Equity is about systems and
Yeah.
things that can make our head hurt, like policies and procedures and systems design. And I think one of the misconceptions, one of the profound myths in our society, particularly American society, is the world is the way it is because that's just how it naturally evolved. And that's
Mhm.
not true. Like there were people in power who very intentionally designed for the outcomes that we have. Right. So what do I mean
Yeah.
by that? And there's a lot of stories and examples I give in the book, but the most succinct one is probably the fact that in this country, we defined race for Black people, saying that if you had one drop of so-called Negro blood, you would be
Yeah.
considered Black.
Right.
But for Native Americans, for the indigenous people of this country, we
Mhm.
created this artificial thing called blood quantum levels that said that you had to have 1/16th indigenous blood to be considered Native American. Now, why is that?
Mm.
That's because in Article 1 of the Constitution, the founding fathers committed to providing services in perpetuity for the indigenous people of this country. So the minute you say it's one drop, then you have a lot of people you have to take care of. But if you make this cutoff of 1/16, you start to decimate the population over
I
generations.
see. Yeah.
And then we had slavery, and by saying one drop, you were allowed to grow a free labor population easily. And so
Oh,
we
that's so good.
racialized one group expansively, and we
Yes.
racialized another group subtractively. And that is how we've gotten to where we are. That was designed. That was not evolution. That was
Yeah.
not happenstance. That was intentional design for oppression. right?
Yeah,
And we have to use the same level of thinking and systems thinking and intention if we want to design for equity.
that is so good. I don't know if I've ever heard it expressed in that way, and it really has given me pause. I think it's something that we all need to spend some time um, just reflecting on, because it does place great emphasis on that word design. And our systems were not designed for parity and
Mhm.
equity and equality. And so I often talk about, there is very much a distinction between all the terms: diversity,
Mhm.
equity, and inclusion, belonging, all the terms. And to your point about how sometimes equity does not truly find its way into the conversation in terms of in practice and being actualized, I often challenge practitioners in this work that if we aren't driving towards equity, are we really doing the work, right? And so I love that you are solarly focused on the equity piece. I think that's critically important. So what makes your book, and you've touched on this a little bit, but I want to go a little bit deeper into this, because I find that there's a lot of text and content and resources abound right now just on this broad topic. But you clearly said that you believe there is something really unique about your book and how you talk about, equity and how it is differentiated from other equity literature. So let's hone in on that a bit more.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that, I mean, listen, if I'm very honest, I have heard DEI practitioners define equity wrong.
Okay.
Like, I think I once heard somebody say it's a feeling. I was like, it has nothing to do with feelings. That's not
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
not, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I wanted to focus on it. But I also the design approach, like I have a bit of a background in human-centered design is really important. And this is what I learned from my mentor, Dr. Janetta Betch-Cole, is um, you have to design for how humans are, not how you think they should be.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
And I am the most, I think, at fault of having this idealism of like, that people will rise to the better angels of their nature every time, and they won't. And so if that's our hope, and this is where I think why I wanted to focus on equity is because it's not because the interpersonal stuff isn't important, but if we think our theory of change is that we are going to wake everybody up and everybody's going to have an elevated consciousness and then we're going to have a more just world, that
Yeah.
will not scale. Like, have you met people? Have you hung out with your family
Have you been
recently?
under a rock? Have you been paying attention? Yes, yes, yes. I so agree with your sentiments there. And you said just, equity is really that conduit towards justice. And
Yeah.
so you don't create justice by just having people feel a certain way or the rhetoric of the sentiments being expressed. It has to be directly connected to the systems change work that leads to that very impactful, meaningful outcomes that can be sustained. And so I totally agree. Continue, please.
No, I mean, that's where the word equity came from, was actually
Yeah.
from legal precedents of understanding that the letter of the law does not suffice for justice.
Yeah.
It comes from England, from understanding that you need to have something more than the letter of the law for there to be justice, that some justice needs to be equitable. When you have one party that has no money suing a party that has a lot of money, it cannot simply be like an even split of the bills, right? Like this doesn't make sense. And that's where it came from. And so, I think it's really important to, understand that there's going to be a difference between following the letter of the law and achieving justice, but two, that we have to think beyond this is just about people being nice or good.
Right. Oh, absolutely. 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 And so if you're like me, or if I'm like you, whichever one, I think they're both probably the same, you probably also get frustrated by the conflation of equity being synonymous with equality. So speak on that.
Yes. So it's not synonymous. And I talk a lot in the book about that. Um, you know, But so here's the thing, though. I also don't think we should throw out equality.
Oh, I so agree. Yes, absolutely. It has its purpose. They're interconnected for a reason, but they're not the same. And that
Yeah.
distinction makes all the difference in really seeing equity and justice actualize.
Yeah, and so I say that like equality is where everybody gets the same thing. Equity
Yeah.
is where everybody gets what they need in
Yeah.
order to contribute their strengths and in order to have equal access to opportunity and human rights. And the example I often give is marriage equality in the gay community. That in the late 90s and the early 2000s, there was a push amongst a lot of gay rights groups for civil unions as a legal protection for same-sex marriage. But then they got together in like the mid 2000s and decided that if they didn't go for marriage equality, they would have the legal precedent for separate and unequal protection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so they realized they had to go for marriage equality
Yeah.
in order to have equal human rights and equal access to benefits.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I often say equity and equality are opposite sides of the same coin of justice. And knowing whether a problem or a challenge requires an equitable solution or an equal solution takes a significant amount of wisdom and discernment. It takes really a deep understanding of the problem and the ability to understand the ripple effects of a solution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that requires slowing down. And so when people ask, well, why haven't we gotten places? I was like, because this work is hard and I don't think we understand all our problems deeply enough.
Yeah. 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 The power of the pause, slowing down certainly can benefit us in many ways. But I also will say that it creates significant tension points because there's certain individuals to say, well, slowing down. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of years of systemic oppression and racism. And so, I mean, how much longer do we have to wait? We're ready to kind of see the change really, be actualized. And so what do you say to that?
So my response to that is comes very much from Eastern philosophy and my background being Indian, in that if you think about this, like how much do we have to wait until we get this end state of justice, you will always be disappointed.
Yeah, good point.
That's not the game.
Yeah,
This is
good
an
point.
infinite game, right? The world evolves.
Yeah.
When you have, I talk about in my book how the Black Civil Rights Movement advocated for the passage of the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965,
Mhm.
which changed how we gave out visas. Before 1965, visas and green cards were allocated to preserve the homogeneity of North America, meaning the white majority. After 1965, they were given to preserve family ties and to meet labor needs, which is how a lot of Asians, like myself, got to this country. Like my parents came here and I was the first generation born here. However, even in that act of equity and inclusion, the system evolved and certain inequities got built in that the US immigration system began to take advantage of socialized education in other countries like India to meet their labor needs. So my parents, who were relatively poor, went to med school for, they said, like $50 a semester. And then they get to come here with their debt-free medical degrees and do really well. And that's how the model minority myth got built.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then they are comparing the Asian experience that is based on socialized education, which is not something that is provided to poor Black and brown people in this country.
Yeah.
And if it was, I think you would have just as many people with poor parents and dark skin that become doctors and lawyers and engineers as you do in the Indian diaspora. And so we have to understand that the game is not, when are we going to hit this state of equality and justice for all? We're never going to hit that state, right?
Yeah.
The world moves, the pendulum swings. And the question is, how are you going to spend your time on Earth?
Yeah.
Are you going to spend it planting seeds for more justice and equality and inclusion for future generations? Or are you going to spend it tearing it down?
Yeah. That is so rich. I feel like we all need to kind of just sit with that for a moment. And by the way, the historian in you is shining right now. You're educating us, and I love that. I think it's important for us to be able to connect the dots to the historical context of normal day conversations we're having around this broad and complex topic. And so, yes, I agree with you, Nika. And there's another Nika that's in our community today. She's saying, yes, so informative. And by the way, the chat is open. So if this is resonating, if there's some interesting tidbits that are being sharing and you have some thoughts around, please use the chat to help extend our conversations. So I want to stay here for a moment. I want to talk about your journey as an equity strategist. Have there been, and I'm sure there has, but I want you to share some of those personal, pivotal moments that influenced your understanding or approach to DEI.
Mm. I mean, the most pivotal is my relationship with my mentor, Janetta Betchkol.
Yeah, you've mentioned her name a couple times. And so I just want to certainly make sure that we are leaning into understanding that this was a very important relationship for you to the work and how you show up to this work right now.
Well, and I think it's an important person for every DEI practitioner to know. So for those of you who don't know who Dr. Cole is, she was the first Black woman president of Spelman College in 1987, which is late for a college that is for Black women. Previously, they had all been white women or Black men.
Right. Take that in for a second. 1987.
Yeah.
That's just a few years before 1990.
Yeah, right? She was also the president of Bennett College for Women, so the only person to serve as a president of two historically Black colleges for women. Those positions allowed her to get access to corporate America and be on boards, and she started to see how DEI was actually being implemented more pragmatically and with better outcomes than it was in higher education. And she also served as the director of the Smithsonian, but is basically a DEI icon for those of you who don't know her. Like, in terms of honoring our ancestors, she is one that we all like. We stand on her shoulders. She comes from, she's a trained anthropologist. She was an anthropology professor before she was president of a college, and has a very, and organizational development has its roots in anthropology as well. And so she taught me a lot about how to do this work well, how to do this work with a lens on power, with a lens on culture and human nature. It's not just about like whatever ideals you can have, it's about how effective can you be for material improvements on people's lives. And so I think that, I had always been interested in this work, but when I met her, I really, she and I have been collaborating on a book that we hope to publish, that we will publish. We will publish it.
You will publish it.
We will publish it. But it was like 7 lessons from her journey, and I basically just sat at her feet and learned everything I could.
Yeah.
And she comes from a long, like her history in this country, her family's history goes back many, many generations. She's the descendant of Zephaniah Kingsley, who was an enslaver in Florida, and Anna Kingsley, his common law wife, who was a Wolof princess. Her great-grandfather was also the first Black millionaire of Florida. And so that history of racism, but then also her ability to be an anthropologist and be genuinely inclusive of all people. She does not do this work simply for the liberation of herself or people who look like her or have her shared lived experience. She is centered in her experience as a Black woman, but is genuinely inclusive of all people, all marginalized people, and is advocating for the eradication of all oppression, not simply the ones that she has suffered from.
Yeah, I love that. I did place just a link into the chat for those who are interested in learning a bit more about Cole, but the amplification of that last point that you made, I think, is something for all of us who care deeply about humanity to model after. And that is, even though we may have our own lived experiences, that kind of engenders us to those who share similar experiences. I think that, when we are cognizant of the injustices that exist across so many different, communities that are disadvantaged and marginalized and oppressed, we certainly should be working in concert to help lift up the needs of all of those communities. And so thank you for sharing that. I want to talk about brevity and wit. As I was reading, I was like, I love this name. I love this name, brevity and wit. And so can you tell us about the inception of brevity and wit, and
Sure.
how does your strategy and design firm empower organizations to foster change in the world?
Yeah, well, so I had to come up with a really memorable name, because when your name is Minal Bopaiah, nobody will be able to type it into Google I couldn't name it Minal Bopaiah Consulting. I knew that, and nor did I want to. And so I was, I was an English major, and was trying to think of words to describe how I write. Love ampersands because I'm a design nerd and a font nerd. And so so it just sort of came to me many, many years ago. I held on to the name for years before I actually got incorporated as a company.
Okay.
I was just like, no, I'm getting this URL and just paying year after year until I can get to a company.
Yeah.
So that's how we came into being. And it works we do a lot of work in communications around DEI, like how to communicate DEI effectively. We also do full service graphic design with a DEI lens. So really looking at dismantling white supremacy and how you choose stock photos, making sure visual design is accessible to people with low vision, and all of the considerations around design, just visual representation, because so much of our stereotypes are through visual representation.
Absolutely. And
Right?
think about how powerful media is in general.
Yeah.
So I love that there are individuals that are directly centered and focused in that niche, because that is so important.
Yeah. And then we also do organization design. So taking this idea of like design and how are you setting up your system and your organizations to get to equitable and inclusive outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. That is really good.
And then the last thing we do is I often give keynote talks. We have a few other people who will give keynote talks. And that's a great way to start to get these ideas in organizations in a way that's fun, that's, boosts morale, and, allows somebody from the outside to say the thing that a lot of people on the inside are thinking.
Right. Right. Exactly. They're like, we're thinking it, we're feeling it, but we don't feel safe saying it. So you come on, outsider, you say this for us. Yes, that is often the role that we play, right, as consultants and as partners to different organizations. So I particularly resonate with the idea of this, full service graphic design that's centered on the DEI lens, because as someone who spent a number of years, my background is marketing communications, kind of in the the ad agency, marcom world. I realize how
Are they signing in when you have an appointment?
It's such a
no sign in. Okay.
Just a quick reminder to please make sure that you are on mute. I'm hearing a conversation going on, but I know how important that is, and I feel like it's not something that has at least naturally found its way into like the curriculum of how in which you show up to that work, right? I mean, keep in mind, you are, there to be smart marketing partners to your clients whose consumer constituencies represent diverse America and even global, right, audiences. And so how are we not thinking more intently about building in that DEI lens into our whatever the product is that we may be designing? So I love that that's something that you focus on.
Yeah.
I want to remind this audience that momentarily I'm going to be shifting and I'm going to give you a chance to present your questions or your contributions to the conversation. And you can do so if you are joining us by LinkedIn Live by just going to the comment section and placing your questions there. And we will pull that over into our Zoom community. Or if you're here live, a part of our Zoom community, you can use the raise hand feature. And that lets me know that you are interested in being added to the spotlight and being invited to unmute yourself to share. So be percolating and thinking on those questions or curiosities that are coming up for you, and then momentarily we'll shift. So while you're thinking on your questions, I want to talk about mountain of racial triangulation, right? And I want you to walk us through this. It's an image and the dynamics that are at play to it. So explain that to us and let us know why it's important.
Yeah, well, so this gets to what I was saying earlier about, how Asians are positioned as a model minority. And what's not being said is like in contrast to problematic minorities, which are meaning Black and brown people,
Mhm.
well, Black and Latinx people mainly, and Indigenous people. Um, and yet it's a complicated thing. So can we get the image up? Is that possible?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm going to ask my team because we do have a link with an image. And so I'm actually going to ask my team to place that into the chat so that you all can source it as Minal was talking about it, just to give you a better understanding.
Yeah, so just if you and I'll talk through it, like if you think of an X and a Y axis, right? On the Y axis, we have, and this is fabricated. This is not real, right? But this is how society socializes, that there are inferior and superior races, right? And that white supremacy says white people are absolutely at the top, Black people are at the bottom, and Asians get pegged somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
However, on the X-axis, there's being an insider and being a foreigner.
Hmm.
And white and Black people get to be seen as insiders in American culture, and Asians are seen as foreigners.
Hmm.
So while Asians may commit acts that reinforce this racist idea of Black inferiority,
Yeah.
Black and white people tend to commit acts that reinforce this idea that Asians are not really Americans.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the only people that triangulation serves are white people.
Yeah.
Because the minute we start fighting, they don't have to expend any effort to keep us down.
Oh, absolutely. So like we're pinning against each other. This is really good. I want you to continue because I think that there's a lot to be said and a lot to unpack around just this notion. So continue, please.
Yeah, I mean, well, how should I continue?
I mean, go deeper and to elaborate on that because, I
Yeah.
think for some people in this audience, while we certainly have heard of the model minority,
Yeah.
I don't think that we've really contextualized it, maybe with the historical understanding that maybe you could bring to this conversation. So that's what I'm looking to kind of round out this topic with.
Yeah. So the way that this shows up is that fundamentally, we have to understand as human beings, we are all capable of being victim and victimizer.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can be an Asian person who experienced aggressive racism after 9/11 or after COVID, right? For being Asian, for being South Asian, for being East Asian, right? You can also then engage in anti-Blackness, right? That like you can be the victim of racism and you can be the victimizer who acts according to racist ideology. You can be a Black person who has been pitted on this fabricated ladder at the very bottom of racial hierarchy, and you can engage in xenophobic acts against Asians. You can forget that most Black people, particularly if they're Christian, can wear a symbol of their religion without fear of getting beaten up for it.
Yeah.
Which is not what Sikh Americans could do after
Right.
9/11 when they were wearing a turban.
Right.
Right. And we have to be able to own both sides of that history.
Yeah, I'm placing this note into the chat, but really what I'm saying is that this is real talk. And I appreciate your ability and boldness and willingness to lean into it because we need to have these conversations. We need to have these conversations. I mean, I think that for us to pretend that just because maybe we are a part of a marginalized population of people and we've experienced systems of oppression that we know better and that we're automatically just conditioned to not apply that same type of oppression to others. And that is not the case. We see it all the time across all populations, even within that same population. And we have to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, then we're less inclined to even know that it exists, and to less likely to be mindful of how do we combat this? How do we try to unlearn some of the behaviors and the mindsets that has kept us in this place of straddling that fence and not being truly committed to even checking our own selves, interrogating our own behaviors, thoughts, and habits. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your boldness and bringing this information to communities through your book, through your talks. So thank you.
Yeah, well, and what I'll say also is, when you can own our shared history as both victim and victimizer, it actually makes you far more effective at DEI.
I agree.
And the reason is because I'm actually not a fan of the word ally, or like, I think there are acts of allyship, but I think it gets very problematic when people want to base their identity on being a good person. Whether you say that by saying I'm an ally, or say that by saying I'm Christian, it gets very complicated, because then people whose identity is hooked on I am a good person have a really hard time taking feedback when they do something harmful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. So,
and if your identity can be based on I am from a history of being both victim and victimizer, that I am a complex human being capable of both, then it becomes easier to, one, you unhook your identity from your behavior. That who you are, like your behavior can go either way, and who you are is different, right? And that to some extent your behavior reflects who you are. But if you commit if you commit a foul, you don't throw away your whole self over it.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is easier said than done. Easier said than done. I mean, we're probably talking, very calmly about this, but this is complex on so many different levels. And so want to move to the practicality. My background says making DEI practical. I'm all about that. We need to take these complex topics and demystify them, even as deep and multi-layered as they are. And so I want to get to, now that we've named kind of the what, and we've enlightened a lot of us with some deeper education and knowledge on this, how do we avoid falling into this divide and conquer approach and tactic? What do we do?
Yeah. I think so. There's a couple of things. One, be aware that like you're getting played. Like you are getting played.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, listen, like if you and I have beef, that's fine. If we have beef because some other white man started it, no, I'm not playing that game.
I'm laughing here because yes, be aware you're being played. I don't want to skirt past that. I mean, that in and of itself should spark some rage. It should spark some emotion, some anger. And I feel like sometimes we need all those things to be called to action. But yes, we are being played. And while we may want to perceive that as very unintentional, as unconscious, is it really? Is it really? And I would venture to say that no, this is part of, and this is why I think there's so much challenge with the separation and the acknowledgement of, we're not saying because you have power and privilege that you're bad people. We just want you to interrogate how in which you're leveraging that, how in which you're using that, and how there could be opportunities for you to help create this greater sense of parity all around and equity all around. I just had to lean into that. Be aware you're being played. Okay.
No, I mean, like, listen, like Asians were behind the lawsuit that overturned affirmative action.
Yeah.
And I get why. Like, I have my own experience of affirmative action where I was like, what? Like, this makes no sense. Right? Like the way, there are some ways in which it does not benefit us. And I can acknowledge that. And I can say that I am not going to allow that to be a reason to tear down Black people.
Right. Right.
Right? That like, I can say like, this is problematic. It does not benefit us. but I also am not going to win by stepping on somebody else's neck.
Right.
Right. And so I'm willing to have a very sophisticated conversation about affirmative action, because I think there are some problems with it, even though I was not for overturning it. Right. Like, and so I think we need to be able to hold that space of being like, I am not going to be used as your pawn to oppress another group in order for my group to get ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not seeing any hands raised right now, which I'm lucky for me because I am really tuned into this conversation. I want to kind of keep driving. But again, if you do have questions, I do wish to share this space. So place them into the chat or use the raise hand feature. How does like power and money and time,
Yeah.
intersect with when we're trying to design equitable
Yeah.
organizations? And how can we approach these elements to really optimize positive, sustainable impact?
Yeah. So let's start with power. So there's a lot of ways in which people frame power. I find the most helpful way is to basically say that no matter what type of power you have, whether it's positional, informal, social, historical, political, there are two ways of using your power.
Yeah.
You can use it in a supremacist manner, which is taking more than one share and using it to control, dominate, exploit, extract, oppress. Or you can use it in a liberatory manner, which is using your power to connect, repair, heal, and empower others.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about organizations and how we design them, we have to ask, how is the organization using its power in all of its decision-making? And that often manifests most easily in money and time, right? Most women have 20 hours of unpaid labor at home, regardless of whether they have children. This is not about being a mom. If motherhood was what was keeping women back from being in leadership, you would see senior leadership teams peppered with child-free women like me, and you don't. That's not the problem. The problem is that women just carry more labor for their families, right? And so when you have promotions and leadership positions that require more than 40 hours of work, you have designed a job that benefits men.
Yeah.
Fundamentally.
Yeah.
Right? And then on top of it, when you say that you can negotiate a salary, the research has shown that when women negotiate, they are actually, it's not because they lack confidence that they don't negotiate. What happens is they're actually seen as less desirable to work with.
Yeah.
And I have heard numerous stories of women who have tried to negotiate and companies have come back and rescinded the job offer.
Yeah.
And so what it is, the reason they don't negotiate is because it's an accurate read of the environment that they're in. And so if you wanted to use your power for more gender equity, you would simply post non-negotiable salaries on jobs. Because let's be honest, my salary is only limited by my imagination. What you can offer me is limited by your budget. Right? So why would you not just simply be like, stop wasting everybody's time and like just be transparent about how much you can afford to pay for this position and make that equitable and stop the whole facade of negotiation, which advantages men. Men like negotiating more than women, and they do not pay the social cost of being seen less desirable to work with.
100%. And that's a problem. So I'm glad you're naming it. Yeah. Okay, so we do have a question. This is from Michael Sinclair, and he placed this into the chat. Peace, I have a question. Along with racism, nepotism plays a role against equity in the workplace. What role does nepotism play in the hindrance of equity? Oftentimes, workers are denied advancements or promotions due to not being in a clique or in a sexual relationship with one in power. How can this be combated?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever gotten a question like this before.
I was going to say, yeah, Michael is thinking today. Thank you, Michael, for your question.
I think, so I used to really believe, because I was an Asian kid who was raised to believe that if you study hard and work hard, you'll get ahead. That's only half the equation. Like, hard work is important. The other part of the equation is system support, right? Is the system supporting you? But the other part that I was not privy to being a kid of immigrants is like leadership culture and the importance of relationships in leaders are only as good as the relationships with their senior leadership team.
Yeah.
Right. Now, if somebody's getting promotions due to a sexual relationship, I'm pretty sure that's illegal, if not grossly unethical.
Right.
Right? Like, I don't even know what to say other than you should probably leave that company. Like, I don't,
Leave the
right?
company, alert all the appropriate officials. Yes.
Yeah, right. Like, I'm pretty sure that's illegal. But if being in a clique, like, I've come around to this. I used to really hate this, like the way people would like favor people they get along with. But if you're a leader, then you need people you can trust, and that comes down to the quality of the relationship. There's a
Yeah.
difference between people who can lead inclusively and have high quality relationships with different people, and leaders who only want to be surrounded by people who either think like them or look like them and act like them.
Oh, that's the whole cultural fit versus cultural add discussion that continues to come up in these topics. But yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So the quality of those relationships are important, and I would work on the leader to see how can they build trust with people who are different from them.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's an important question. And so my follow-up is, do you have some tips, for building trust with people that are different? Because you're right. We as humans, we gravitate towards people who are like us. And that creates a connection that then fuels trust. It fuels a sense of belonging, which fuels validation and acceptance. And we like it there because it becomes very comfortable. But when there's conflict, whether it's healthy or not, sometimes we may not see how healthy it is. We will just perceive it as, I'm not comfortable now, so I need to get out, which means we lose our propensity to even have a chance of building that rapport and that trust and across difference. And so in all of 4 minutes, we need you to solve the world around this question.
So I think the best framework for trust building is Brene Brown's framework, The Anatomy of Trust. And
Yeah.
at Brevity and Wit, we actually even have an inventory that can allow you to rate yourself and your team.
Yep.
And the most important part, I think, in organizations that are diverse is not simply talking about values, but attaching observable behaviors. Because I
Yes.
know the way Indians define generosity and the way Americans define generosity is very different. And so I need to know, as somebody who's different, when I walk into a company, how does this company define generosity? How does this company define reliability, which leads to trust, or integrity, right? I need the observable behaviors because my cultural upbringing is different than your cultural upbringing. So what I think is like good behavior and what you think is good behavior or trusting behaviors is going to be different unless we get very explicit about it.
Be very explicit about it. Clarity is kind. Clarity is often a way to avoid resistance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And unhealthy conflict, not just conflict, but unhealthy conflict, because healthy conflict is good. And so I love the specificity around being very clear to communicate how those values, to your point, attaches to the behaviors. What does this look like in action? And I think that is a step that many organizations fail to. They will have all of these guiding principles of what they believe in inclusivity and belonging and equity to look like and feel like, but they don't necessarily take it the next step and put it into context of very specific behaviors. And so you're leaving us with so many nuggets. I probably could talk with you for another hour or so. That just means we're going to have to invite you back. But I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I show up every week and I tell my team this. I show up every week with the expectation of imparting knowledge through our platform and through our show and our content, as well as receiving knowledge and learning. And this is one of those shows I'm walking away from excited to go back and revisit the conversation myself. I'll watch the replay and just to be intentional about taking notes. It's been so rich. I'm going to get your book. I'm going to read your book. Thank you. And I see that some folks in this community are saying, I just ordered the book. I'm going to get the book. And so I hope that you all will certainly get Minal's book and that you will read it and share it out with others. I want to give you our final 2 minutes to close this out in whatever way that feels appropriate to you. If there's something that I haven't asked you about, which I'm sure is lots of topics that you're feeling a lot of energy around, today, and you want to just kind of socialize some thoughts, please do share that with with us. And by the way, quickly, we're going to place, actually, we have placed into the link some resources that you have available. And so I hope that you all will take advantage of that. So please close us out.
Yeah, so I think just what's sitting on my heart now with like all the news, and we're in the holidays, and a couple of other things that have happened in my life, is just to really take the time, particularly in the winter months, to like rest and spend time connecting with people we love. There's a poem by Nika Gill that starts with, "Everything is on fire, but everyone I know is doing something they love that makes the world better." Something like that. I'm not getting it verbatim. And I think that I think sometimes people in the DEI space have this guilt complex that if they're not working all the time, they're somehow falling short. And I don't think that that's true. And I think we should take the time where the days are shorter and the nights are longer to rest more and to recuperate and to rejuvenate, because you owe it to yourself, and you owe it to future generations to teach them how to do this sustainably.
Yeah. So, well, I'm not surprised that you would drop another important gem that I want to unpack right at the top of the. So, my friends, we're gonna be in touch, and we're gonna be in community. I have so enjoyed sharing this space with you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to all of you who have joined us for this conversation. If you found it valuable and useful, then I do encourage you to share it out with others, catch the replay, invite folks to check out the podcast when it becomes available, which will be soon. And we hope to see you back, not next week, because that's Thanksgiving, but the week following. And safe weekend, everyone. Thanks so much.